The stars belonged to the Jatharan Empire, or so they believed. For 300 years, their fleets had swept across the galaxy like a wave of unstoppable force. 47 species had fallen before them. 47 civilizations had looked upon the shimmering energy shields of Jatharan warships and despaired. No weapon could touch them. No defense could stop them. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the holographic display with satisfaction. The latest conquest had taken only 6 days. The Karathi Federation, once proud and defiant, now sent tribute ships filled with resources and technology. Their plasma cannons had been useless. Their particle beams had accomplished nothing. Every shot had simply vanished into the phase harmonic shields, dispersed into harmless light and heat. "Admiral, the scanning division has detected another species," his second officer reported. The young officer's scales gleamed with excitement. "They call themselves humans. Their world is designated as Earth." Kethvar gestured and the hologram shifted. A blue and green planet appeared, rotating slowly. Data scrolled beside it. Population 8 billion. Technology level early space age. Military capability unknown but presumed minimal. "Show me their weapons," Kethvar commanded. The display changed again. Images of human warships appeared, blocky and crude compared to the elegant curves of Jatharan design. But it was the weapons data that made Kethvar's throat sacs inflate with amusement. His officers began to laugh, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Projectile weapons?" one officer said between laughs. "They still use projectile weapons?" Kethvar studied the information with disbelief turning to contempt. The humans had energy weapons, yes, but their primary armaments were listed as railguns, coil guns, and something called autocannons. These were weapons that threw solid objects at targets. Physical ammunition. Kethvar had seen such things only in military museums, relics from the dawn of Jatharan civilization thousands of years ago. "They are primitives," Kethvar announced. "They have barely left their home system. They fight with weapons our ancestors abandoned before they learned to write." The bridge crew buzzed with conversation. Some suggested bypassing Earth entirely. Why waste time on such an insignificant species? But Kethvar saw opportunity. The humans occupied a region rich in rare elements. Their system contained gas giants perfect for fuel harvesting. And most importantly, crushing them would send a message to the entire galaxy. Even the most backward species must bow to Jatharan superiority. "Compose a message," Kethvar ordered. "Standard terms. They have 30 cycles to surrender, or we will demonstrate the price of defiance." The message was sent across the void, translated into human languages by their computers. Kethvar imagined the panic it would cause. He had seen it before on 47 worlds. The desperate meetings, the impossible debates, the final inevitable surrender. On Earth, the message arrived at the Unified Defense Council headquarters in Geneva. Commander Sarah Chen read it 3 times, her hands steady despite the cold fear spreading through her chest. She was 42 years old, a career officer who had spent 20 years preparing for a threat she had hoped would never come. Now it was here. The council chamber filled quickly. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered around the circular table. The message from the Jatharan played on screens along the walls. 30 cycles. In human time, that meant 30 of their days. 1 month to decide the fate of humanity. "We should negotiate," the European Union representative said. His voice trembled slightly. "Perhaps we can reach an understanding. Offer them resources in exchange for autonomy." "They're not interested in negotiation," Chen replied. She pulled up footage obtained from a Karathi refugee ship that had fled to human space 3 months ago. The council watched in silence as Jatharan warships destroyed an entire defensive fleet. Beam weapons from the Karathi ship struck the Jatharan vessels and simply vanished. The shields absorbed everything. Then the Jatharan returned fire, and Karathi ships exploded like flowers of flame and debris. "Their shields are unlike anything we've encountered," Chen continued. According to the Karathi data, the phase harmonic technology analyzes incoming energy weapons and matches their frequency. The energy is dispersed across the shield surface and radiated away as heat. Lasers, plasma, particle beams, even nuclear explosions at range. Nothing gets through. "Then we have no choice but to surrender," another representative said. "No." Chen's voice was firm. She had spent the last 3 months studying the Karathi data. She had run simulations. She had consulted with physicists and military theorists. Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons. But our primary weapons aren't energy-based. She pulled up specifications for the UDF fleet. Humanity's warships were built around a different philosophy. Energy weapons existed, certainly, but the primary armament of every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship was kinetic. Railguns that used electromagnetic force to launch tungsten penetrators at incredible speeds. Coil guns that accelerated projectiles through magnetic coils. Mass drivers that could throw tons of metal at targets. The Karathi abandoned kinetic weapons 2,000 years ago, Chen explained. Most advanced species did. Energy weapons are more efficient, easier to power from a ship's reactor, and don't require ammunition storage. But we kept using kinetics because they're simple, reliable, and devastatingly effective. You think our weapons might work? The Asian Coalition representative asked. I think the Jatharan have never faced them, Chen said. I think their shields might not even recognize a solid projectile as a threat. And I think we need to find out before we surrender our freedom. The debate lasted for hours. Some argued for immediate surrender. Others wanted to flee, to send colony ships into deep space to preserve humanity. But eventually a decision was made. They would fight. They would meet the Jatharan fleet and test their theory. If human weapons failed, surrender would still be possible. But they had to try. Chen left the council chamber and went directly to Fleet Command. Orders went out across the solar system. Every ship was to prepare for combat. Manufacturing facilities went into overdrive, producing ammunition by the ton, tungsten penetrators, explosive shells, even old-fashioned bullets for the Marines who might face boarding actions. 28 days later, Kethvar's fleet entered the solar system. 50 warships from light cruisers to massive battle carriers. They moved with confidence, shields already active, glowing with the soft blue light of phase harmonic technology. The Admiral stood on his bridge and smiled. No human transmission had been received. No surrender. That meant he would have the pleasure of a demonstration. Deploy the vanguard, he commanded. We will begin with their outer stations. When they see their defenses fail, they will beg for mercy. The human fleet waited near Jupiter. 35 ships arranged in defensive formation around Ganymede Station. Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UDFS Tenacity, and watched the Jatharan approach on her displays. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. All ships, this is Commander Chen. Today we find out if humanity's oldest weapons can defeat the galaxy's newest armor. All crews to battle stations. Load kinetic rounds. Target the lead vessels. The Jatharan vanguard, 10 ships strong, accelerated toward Ganymede. Behind them, the rest of Kethvar's fleet watched, expecting an easy victory. The Admiral was already composing the message he would send across the galaxy. Earth had fallen. The Jatharan Empire remained invincible, but the battle had not yet begun, and both sides were about to learn that sometimes the old ways endure for good reason. The space around Ganymede Station erupted with light. Human laser batteries opened fire first, brilliant beams crossing millions of kilometers in seconds. They struck the Jatharan shields and vanished, absorbed and dispersed exactly as the Karathi data had predicted. The alien ships did not even slow down. Chen watched from the Tenacity's bridge, her expression unchanged. This was expected. The lasers were not meant to damage the enemy. They were meant to give the Jatharan confidence. Let them think humanity was no different from every other species they had conquered. The second wave came 30 seconds later. Plasma torpedoes launched from human cruisers, blue-white spheres of superheated matter that streaked toward the alien formation. These weapons had destroyed pirate vessels and rebel stations throughout human history. They carried temperatures hot enough to vaporize steel. The Jatharan shields flared brighter as the plasma struck. The torpedoes burst against the energy barriers like water against a window. Not a single alien ship took damage. On the Eternal Dominion, Kethvar's officers cheered. Pathetic, the Admiral said. Their weapons are exactly as primitive as their technology suggested. Open fire, destroy 3 ships. Show them the price of resistance. The Jatharan vanguard unleashed their own weapons. Particle beams, invisible to the human eye but devastating in effect, reached across space. 3 human cruisers, the Marathon, the Vigilant, and the Soul, exploded in rapid succession. Their shields could not stop the alien weapons. Debris scattered in expanding clouds, carrying the bodies of 900 souls. Multiple hull breaches across the fleet. The Tenacity's tactical officer reported. Ganymede Station is requesting permission to evacuate. Negative, Chen said calmly. All ships execute retreat pattern Delta, make it look good. Let them think we're running scared. The human fleet began to pull back, their formation breaking apart. Individual ships fired their thrusters, turning away from the Jatharan advance. On Kethavar's bridge, the officers laughed. Already fleeing. Already broken. The humans would surrender within hours. Pursue them, Kethavar commanded. We will destroy half their fleet. Then they will have no choice but to submit. The Jatharan vanguard accelerated, moving into the space the humans had occupied. They spread out slightly, preparing to hunt down the fleeing vessels. This was the pattern of every battle they had fought. Enemy resistance crumbled. Enemy ships ran. The Jatharan hunted them down one by one, but Commander Chen had no intention of running. As the human ships retreated, they rotated on their axes, presenting their dorsal surfaces to the pursuing aliens. Long rails extended from armored housings, rails designed to accelerate metal to a fraction of light speed. All ships, Chen transmitted. Protocol Winchester is now active. Switch to kinetic batteries. Fire at will. Kethavar noticed the human ships changing orientation. He saw the rails extending from their hulls. His tactical computers identified them as mass accelerators, primitive projectile weapons. He almost laughed again. Did the humans really think chunks of metal could succeed where energy weapons had failed? The first railgun fired from the destroyer Thermopylae. Electromagnetic coils pulsed in sequence, each one accelerating a tungsten penetrator down the length of the rail. In less than a second, a cylinder of metal 20 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide was traveling at 30 kilometers per second. It crossed the distance to the nearest Jatharan cruiser in 45 seconds. The phase harmonic shields did not react. They were designed to detect energy signatures, to analyze frequencies and wavelengths. A solid object had no frequency to match, no energy pattern to disperse. The shields remained inactive, their sensors registering nothing worthy of response. The tungsten penetrator struck the Jatharan cruiser's hull at 30 kilometers per second. The kinetic energy was equivalent to several tons of high explosive. The projectile punched through the outer armor like paper, through interior compartments, through power conduits and structural supports. It exited the other side in a spray of molten metal and atmosphere. Every other human ship fired in the same moment. 35 railguns, each launching multiple rounds. The Jatharan vanguard was suddenly facing a storm of solid metal, traveling at relativistic speeds. Shields that had turned aside every energy weapon in the galaxy did nothing to stop them. The second Jatharan cruiser took 3 hits. The first penetrator destroyed its main reactor. The second tore through its command deck. The third ripped open its hangar bay, venting fighters and atmosphere into space. The ship listed to one side, powerless and bleeding air. Kethavar stared at his displays in absolute incomprehension. Alarms shrieked throughout the Eternal Dominion. 2 of his vanguard ships were reporting critical damage. How? The humans had fired their primitive projectile weapons. Solid metal. How could solid metal bypass phase harmonic shields? Shields are not engaging, his tactical officer reported, voice high with panic. The system does not recognize solid objects as threats. It was never designed to stop physical ammunition. The reality crashed down on Kethavar like a collapsing star. For 300 years, the Jatharan had fought species that used energy weapons. Every civilization they encountered had abandoned kinetics as primitive and inefficient. The shields had never needed to stop solid projectiles. The technology had never been tested against such weapons. Evasive maneuvers, Kethavar roared. Return fire and get us out of their range. But space combat was not like atmospheric flight. Ships could not simply dodge. They had to rotate, fire thrusters, build up velocity in a new direction. The Jatharan vanguard attempted to scatter, but human targeting computers tracked their movements. More railgun rounds followed their trajectories. A Jatharan destroyer took a direct hit to its engines. The penetrator struck the fusion reactor's magnetic containment field. The resulting explosion tore the ship in half. Another cruiser lost its main weapon array, the rail strike cutting through the particle beam emitters like scissors through fabric. The human fleet stopped retreating. Now they advanced, their railguns firing in steady rotation. Each ship could launch a round every 3 seconds. With 35 ships firing, that meant nearly 12 projectiles crossing space toward the Jatharan every second. Chen watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The theory had been proven. Jatharan shields were invincible against energy. But kinetic weapons, the oldest weapons humanity had ever invented, passed through them as if they did not exist. Concentrate fire on the damaged vessels, she ordered. Force them to retreat or be destroyed. The third cruiser, already wounded from the first volley, took 2 more hits. Its superstructure buckled. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull. The ship began to tumble, atmosphere and debris trailing behind it like a dying comet. Cathvar made his decision. Pride warred with survival, but survival won. All ships retreat, fall back to the main fleet. Emergency jump now. The Jatharan vanguard turned and fled, their faster-than-light drives engaged, tearing holes in space. 7 ships had entered the engagement. Only 6 escaped. The 7th, too badly damaged, was left behind, its crew abandoning ship in escape pods. The human fleet held position. No one cheered. 3 cruisers had been lost. 900 people were dead. But they had done what no other species had managed. They had hurt the invincible Jatharan Empire. Chen activated the fleet-wide channel. All ships, excellent work. Begin recovery operations for survivors and escape pods, and send a message to Earth. Tell them the shields can be beaten. Tell them we have a chance. Cathvar reached the main fleet and went directly to his command staff. His scales were pale with shock and rage. The other admirals gathered around holographic displays, watching footage of the battle. They saw their ships, protected by the finest shields in the galaxy, being torn apart by chunks of metal. "How is this possible?" one admiral demanded. "We defeated the Karathi. We defeated the Nexian Commonwealth. We defeated everyone. Because everyone else abandoned kinetic weapons," Cathvar said bitterly. "The humans still use them. Our shields cannot stop them. We have been invincible for so long that we never considered facing a weapon our shields were not designed to counter." A heavy silence fell over the command staff. For the first time in 300 years, the Jatharan Empire had met an enemy that could hurt them. The invincible armor had failed. And somewhere in the back of every admiral's mind, a terrible question formed. What else had they overlooked? 2 weeks passed in a state of uneasy calm. The Jatharan fleet remained at the edge of the solar system, and humanity used every hour to prepare. Factories on Earth, Mars, and the asteroid belt ran at full capacity. Railgun ammunition by the ton, coilgun rounds by the millions. Even old chemical propellant shells, designs from centuries past, were pulled from archives and manufactured. On the Eternal Dominion, Cathvar's scientists worked without sleep. The phase harmonic shields had been the Empire's greatest achievement, but now they revealed their greatest weakness. The technology had evolved to counter energy weapons exclusively. Physical objects simply did not register as threats in the shield's detection systems. Dr. Venral, the chief scientist, presented her solution to the admiral. "We have developed kinetic dampening fields. They create a zone of intense gravitational distortion around the ship. Solid objects entering this field will lose velocity rapidly. A projectile traveling at 30 kilometers per second will slow to a few hundred meters per second before striking the hull. At that speed, our armor can easily resist impact." Cathvar studied the data. The energy requirements were substantial, and the fields could not be maintained continuously. But they would work. They had to work. The alternative was unthinkable. A retreat, an admission that the mighty Jatharan Empire could be stopped by primitive weapons. "Install them on every ship," he commanded. "We attack in 3 days. The humans will learn that we can adapt to any threat." The second battle began at Mars orbit. The human fleet had taken position around the Red Planet, protecting the extensive shipyards and military installations. 60 ships now, reinforcements having arrived from the outer colonies. Chen stood on the Tenacity's bridge, knowing this engagement would be different. The Jatharan would not make the same mistake twice. The alien fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 15 capital ships supported by dozens of smaller vessels. But as they advanced, human sensors detected something new. Energy fields surrounding each ship, different from the shields, pulsing with gravitational distortions. "They've adapted," the Tenacity's science officer reported. "Those fields will slow kinetic projectiles significantly." Chen nodded slowly. She had expected this. Any military force that had dominated the galaxy for centuries would be capable of learning from defeat. "Begin with standard railgun attack. Let's see how well their countermeasures work." The human fleet opened fire. Tungsten penetrators crossed the void, and this time the Jatharan did not sit passively. As the projectiles entered the kinetic dampening fields, their velocity dropped dramatically. Rounds that should have struck at 30 kilometers per second hit at less than 1. They impacted Jatharan hulls and bounced off, leaving only small dents in the armor. Kethavar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had scored their surprise once. It would not happen again. All ships advance. Destroy their shipyards. Show them that the Jatharan Empire cannot be stopped by accidents of primitive technology. The human fleet retreated again, firing railguns continuously. But every round was slowed and deflected. The Jatharan pressed forward, their particle beams reaching out to claim human ships. The cruiser Wellington exploded. The destroyer Hastings broke apart. The battle was turning into a repeat of the first engagement, but with the results reversed? Chen watched 3 more ships die and felt the weight of every life lost. But she did not panic. She had not revealed all of humanity's options. Cease railgun fire. Switch to artillery protocol. Load high explosive rounds. Her tactical officer looked uncertain. Commander, those are even slower than railgun penetrators. The dampening fields will stop them completely. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Chen replied. Fire when ready. The human ships changed their attack pattern. Instead of railguns, they deployed weapons that had not been seen in space combat for 200 years. Mass drivers, essentially giant cannons firing shells filled with chemical explosives. The rounds were slower than railgun penetrators, subsonic by comparison, but they were much larger. The first shells entered the kinetic dampening fields and slowed as expected. But these were not designed to penetrate through kinetic energy alone. As they made contact with Jatharan hulls, contact fuses triggered. The shells exploded. Chemical explosives were crude compared to plasma or antimatter. But crude did not mean ineffective. Each shell carried hundreds of kilograms of high explosive compound. When they detonated against the alien hulls, the shock waves rippled through armor plating. Shrapnel, thousands of metal fragments scattered in all directions. The Jatharan shields, still designed only for energy weapons, did nothing to stop the shrapnel. The kinetic dampening fields had slowed the shells themselves, but they could not stop the thousands of fragments created by the explosion. Metal shards punctured sensor arrays, communication dishes, weapon mounts, and thruster assemblies. A Jatharan battlecruiser took a direct hit to its port side. The explosion tore open its armor, and shrapnel ripped through internal systems. The ship's main reactor, damaged by fragment impacts, began to overload. The crew evacuated before the fusion core breached, turning the battlecruiser into a brief new star. Kethavar stared in disbelief. Again. The humans had found another way through his defenses, not with faster projectiles, but with explosives. The field slowed the shells, yes, but that did not prevent detonation, and the Jatharan had never armored against shrapnel because energy weapons did not create shrapnel. Intensify the dampening fields, he ordered desperately. Strengthen them until nothing can reach us. But the fields had limits. Increasing their power meant draining energy from other systems. Shields weakened, engines slowed, and the human fleet adapted again, closing range to make their explosive shells more accurate. The battle descended into chaos. Human ships maneuvered close to the Jatharan formation, trading damage for accurate shots. The destroyer Agincourt was cut in half by a particle beam, but not before its mass drivers crippled 2 alien cruisers. The Mars shipyards launched their defensive batteries, old military installations that threw explosive shells by the hundreds. Then the boarding actions began. Human Marines, wearing armored suits and carrying coilgun rifles, launched from assault ships in small pods. The Jatharan fired upon these pods, destroying many, but dozens reached their targets. Magnetic clamps secured pods to alien hulls, and cutting torches began opening holes. Kethavar watched his tactical display as red indicators appeared on multiple ships. Boarding parties. The humans were actually attempting to board his vessels. It was insane. It was desperate. But his officers reported that the Marines were succeeding in breaching hulls. The first boarding party entered the cruiser Victorious Blade through a cargo bay. 16 human Marines against a Jatharan crew of 300. The odds should have been overwhelming. But when Jatharan soldiers met the humans in the corridors, they discovered another uncomfortable truth. Jatharan body armor was designed to dissipate energy from beam weapons. The ceramic composite plates could turn aside particle beams and plasma bolts, but the human Marines carried coil guns firing solid metal slugs at supersonic speeds. Bullets. Simple, ancient bullets. The first Jatharan soldier to round a corner was hit 3 times in the chest. His armor, sophisticated and expensive, cracked and failed. The bullets penetrated and the soldier fell. His companions fired their energy weapons at the Marines, but human armor had been built with energy resistance in mind. The beams scorched and burned but did not immediately kill. The firefight lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, the human Marines had taken the cruiser's engine room. They planted explosive charges and evacuated. The victorious blade became a drifting wreck, its engines destroyed from within. Other boarding actions met with mixed success. Some Marines were killed before reaching their objectives. Others succeeded in disabling critical systems. But every action drove home the same message to the Jatharan. Their technology, their armor, their shields, all of it was designed to fight enemies who fought like them. The humans fought differently. Kethvar made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. All ships retreat. Full withdrawal to the outer system. The Jatharan fleet disengaged and fled. Behind them, human ships did not pursue. They held position around Mars, damaged but victorious. Chen looked at the casualty reports and felt sick. 22 ships lost, thousands dead. But Mars still stood. The shipyards remained intact. And the Jatharan had retreated twice. In the debris field, human recovery teams found something unexpected. Escape pods from the crippled Jatharan vessels. Among them was one marked with command insignia. When it was opened, Admiral Kethvar stood inside, his scales pale with humiliation. He had been on the victorious blade, personally commanding from a frontline vessel to restore his honor. When the ship was boarded and disabled, his officers had forced him into an escape pod. Now he was a prisoner of the species he had mocked as primitive. Chen met him in a secured room on the Tenacity. The Admiral was tall, nearly 3 meters, his reptilian features marked with the scars of previous battles. But his eyes showed defeat. "Your shields are invincible," Chen said quietly. "Your armor is the finest in the galaxy." News traveled fast across the galaxy, carried by merchant ships and refugee vessels, by diplomatic channels and encrypted transmissions. The mighty Jatharan Empire, undefeated for 3 centuries, had been repelled twice by a species barely capable of interstellar travel. The humans had found weaknesses that no one else had exploited. They had used weapons that everyone else had abandoned. On 47 conquered worlds, subject species heard the news and felt something they had not felt in generations: hope. The Karathi Federation sent a secret transmission to Earth. Technical data on Jatharan ship designs, locations of supply depots, anything that might help humanity survive. Other species followed. The Nexians shared intelligence on Jatharan tactics. The Thalari provided star maps showing fleet positions. None of these species could fight openly, not yet, but they could help the ones who were fighting. On the Jatharan homeworld of Krathvar, the Supreme Council convened an emergency session. The defeat at Mars had shaken the Empire to its foundations. Not because of the casualties, wars always had casualties, but because it revealed a truth they had been ignoring. Their military doctrine had not evolved in 300 years. They had become complacent, relying on shield technology that made them invincible against conventional threats. But humanity was not a conventional threat. "We must commit the full might of our fleets," High Commander Zethral declared. "This human infestation must be crushed before other species begin to think rebellion is possible." The Council agreed. 500 warships were redirected toward Earth. Resources from a dozen worlds were allocated to the war effort. The Jatharan would not simply defeat humanity. They would obliterate them as an example to the entire galaxy. On Earth, Commander Chen was promoted to Admiral and given command of all human military forces. The promotion came with an impossible responsibility. She had to defend humanity against an armada that outnumbered her fleet 10-1. She had to do it with weapons that were effective but limited. Chen stood in the war room deep beneath Geneva, studying holographic projections of the solar system. Her staff surrounded her, officers from every nation and colony. They had 6 weeks before the Jatharan main fleet arrived. 6 weeks to prepare for what might be humanity's final battle. "Our kinetic weapons work," she said, "but we need more of them. How much ammunition can we produce in 6 weeks?" The logistics officer, a stern woman from the Belt colonies, pulled up production figures. "We've converted every available factory. At current rate, we'll have enough railgun ammunition for sustained engagement of approximately 4 hours. Explosive shells for perhaps 2 hours. After that, we'll be limited to whatever we can manufacture during battle. 4 hours. Chen knew that would not be enough. The Jotharan would send wave after wave of ships. They would accept heavy losses because they had ships to spare. Humanity did not. What about unconventional options? The question sparked a flurry of discussion. Engineers and tacticians presented ideas, some practical, some desperate, all of them born from humanity's situation. They could not match the Jotharan in technology or numbers. They had to think differently. One proposal caught Chen's attention. The asteroid belt contained millions of rocks, some as large as small moons. They also contained hundreds of mining operations with industrial equipment designed to break apart asteroids, mass drivers to launch ore containers, fusion charges for deep excavation. All of it could be weaponized. Gravity does not care about shields, the engineer explained. If we push asteroids into collision courses with Jotharan ships, their dampening fields can slow the impacts, but cannot stop multiple thousand-ton rocks completely. And we have the infrastructure to aim and launch dozens of them. Chen approved the plan immediately. It would take coordination, precise calculations, and luck, but it gave them another option, another way to hurt an enemy that seemed unstoppable. The second proposal was more controversial. Human ships were not as advanced as Jotharan vessels, but they could be modified. Instead of trying to match alien technology, human engineers suggested stripping down ships to their basic components. Remove unnecessary systems, add more ammunition storage, install redundant armor plating, create vessels with one purpose: deliver kinetic weapons at close range. These modified ships were given a nickname by their crews: brawlers. They would not survive long in direct combat, but they would hurt the enemy before they died. Chen authorized construction of 30 brawlers. They would be crewed by volunteers, men and women who understood they were signing up for suicide missions. Every crew position was filled within hours. Humanity had decided to fight, and they would fight with everything they had. As weeks passed, the human fleet evolved. Tactics were refined through simulation and practice. Ships learned to fight in coordinated groups, mixing railguns with explosive shells, energy weapons with kinetic strikes. The goal was to overwhelm Jotharan defenses through variety, to force the enemy to adapt to multiple threats simultaneously. The Jotharan fleet approached the solar system with confidence restored. Yes, they had been surprised twice. Yes, human weapons had proven effective, but now they came in overwhelming numbers. 500 ships against perhaps 100 human vessels. The outcome seemed inevitable. High Commander Zetharal led the fleet personally. He would not make Kethavar's mistakes. He would not underestimate the humans. He would crush them through sheer force, accepting whatever losses were necessary to secure victory. The fleets met at the asteroid belt, a region of space Chen had chosen carefully. The asteroids provided cover, made targeting more difficult, and most importantly, they could be used as weapons. The battle began with the Jotharan advancing in a massive formation. Shields active, dampening fields at maximum strength. Human ships scattered throughout the belt, using rocks as cover, firing from multiple angles. It was guerrilla warfare on a cosmic scale. Chen commanded from the Tenacity, now heavily armored and bristling with weapons. All ships execute Plan Hammer. Target their capital ships. Make them pay for every meter they advance. The first wave of human attacks came from unexpected directions. Railgun fire from behind asteroids. Explosive shells launched from mining stations. Energy weapons from ships that appeared briefly before ducking back into cover. The Jotharan took hits but pressed forward, their numbers allowing them to absorb losses. Then the asteroids began to move. Mining crews had spent weeks placing charges and engines on selected rocks. Now guided by precise calculations, asteroids the size of buildings began accelerating toward the Jotharan formation. The dampening field slowed them but could not stop multi-thousand-ton objects completely. A Jotharan destroyer was struck by an asteroid moving at 2 kilometers per second. The dampening field reduced the velocity to 200 meters per second. That should have been survivable. But the asteroid massed 5,000 tons. Even at reduced speed, the kinetic energy was catastrophic. The destroyer crumpled like paper. More asteroids followed. Some missed. Some were destroyed by Jotharan weapons, but others hit home and each impact crippled or destroyed a ship. The aliens had never faced this tactic. No one threw mountains at their enemies. It was crude. It was wasteful. It worked. Zetharal watched his tactical display with growing frustration. He was losing ships faster than anticipated, not to superior technology but to rocks and bullets. The humans were using the environment itself as a weapon, turning the asteroid belt into a killing field. "Send in the brawlers," Chen ordered when the Jatharan formation began to break apart. 30 modified human ships emerged from the belt at full speed. They were ugly vessels stripped of everything except engines, armor, and weapons. Multiple railguns and mass drivers covered every angle. These ships closed to point-blank range, ignoring Jatharian fire, accepting damage to deliver their payloads. The first brawler, the Defiant, collided with a Jatharian cruiser deliberately. Its crew had evacuated seconds before impact, using escape pods that scattered in all directions. The brawler's remaining ammunition, tons of explosive shells, detonated simultaneously. The cruiser and the brawler both vanished in a fireball that could be seen from Mars. Other brawlers did not ram but fought at ranges measured in hundreds of meters instead of thousands of kilometers. At such close distance, even dampening fields had limited effectiveness. Railgun rounds punched through hulls. Explosive shells tore off weapon mounts and sensor arrays. The brawlers died, every single one, but they took 23 Jatharan ships with them. The battle raged for 8 hours. Human ships employed every tactic they could imagine. Mining explosives attached to asteroids and detonated near enemy vessels. Clouds of shrapnel released into enemy flight paths. Even simple collision courses, turning dead ships into kinetic weapons. When the Jatharan finally retreated, they had lost 140 ships, nearly a third of their invasion force. The human fleet was devastated, reduced to fewer than 40 operational vessels. But they still held the belt. They had proven that numbers alone could not guarantee victory. Across the galaxy, subject species watched the battle footage in awe. The humans had done it again. They had faced overwhelming odds and survived. And in doing so, they had taught every conquered world a lesson. The Jatharan could be beaten. High Commander Zethral was stripped of his rank after the asteroid belt disaster. In his place, the Jatharan Supreme Council made a desperate choice. They recalled Admiral Kethvar from his prisoner cell on Earth. They gave him command of what remained of the invasion fleet with one simple order: redeem yourself or die trying. The human government agreed to the exchange as part of a temporary ceasefire. Both sides needed time to recover. But everyone knew the war was not over. The Jatharan could not accept defeat, and humanity could not accept surrender. Kethvar returned to his people changed. His time in captivity had forced him to study his enemies. He had watched their news broadcasts, read their military history, spoken with human guards who were surprisingly willing to talk. He had learned something the rest of his species refused to believe. The humans were not lucky. They were not primitive. They were simply different. "We have been fighting the wrong war," he told the assembled admirals and generals. "We attempt to counter their kinetic weapons with shields and fields, trying to make our technology work against theirs. But that is not how they fight. They adapt. They use whatever works. If we continue thinking our way is superior, they will destroy us with methods we never considered." The military council resisted his conclusions. They had defeated 47 species. They had the finest technology in the galaxy. How could a species that still used bullets teach them anything about warfare? But Kethvar had seen the casualty reports. He had counted the destroyed ships. So he played them recordings, footage from human military history. Ancient wars fought with swords and spears. Naval battles with wooden ships and cannons. Trenches and machine guns. Tanks and aircraft. Nuclear weapons. Each era showed the same pattern. Humans developed a dominant weapon, then developed a counter to it, then developed a counter to the counter. They never stopped adapting. "They will not try to match our shields with better shields," Kethvar explained. "They will find new ways to bypass them. And we must do the same. We must fight like them, not like ourselves." The council reluctantly approved his plan. The Jatharan fleet would undergo radical changes, physical armor plating added to every ship, crude but effective against kinetic strikes. Close-range weapons developed specifically for fighting at distances where dampening fields were less effective. Most controversial of all, Kethvar ordered the construction of kinetic weapons for Jatharan ships. If the humans proved that bullets worked, then the Jatharan would use bullets too. The fleet gathered at Neptune, far enough from Earth to be safe but close enough to strike quickly. 300 ships, all that remained of the invasion force, all modified according to Kethvar's new doctrine. He stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Redeemer's Blade, and prepared for what he knew would be the final battle. Admiral Chen watched the Jatharan fleet approach Neptune and knew this would be different. Intelligence reports indicated major modifications to enemy ships. The Jatharan were adapting just as she had feared they would. Humanity's advantages were temporary, bought with blood and cleverness. Eventually, the enemy would learn. The human fleet numbered 73 ships, reinforcements having arrived from the outer colonies and emergency construction. But 73 against 300 was still impossible odds. Chen needed something more. She needed an edge that the Jatharan could not adapt to quickly. Her solution came from the physics division. For weeks, scientists had been working on a weapon that took advantage of humanity's one true technological achievement. Humans were not the most advanced species, but they were the best at one thing. They knew how to make things go very, very fast. The weapon was called Project Godrod. Take a tungsten penetrator, make it larger, and accelerate it not with a railgun but with a solar-powered mass driver of incredible size. Place this mass driver near the sun where power was unlimited. Launch the penetrator at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy would be equivalent to a nuclear weapon, but with no radiation signature and no way to defend against it except moving out of the way very quickly. Chen had 4 God Rods ready to launch. 4 chances to cripple the Jatharan fleet before conventional battle was joined. The weapons were already accelerating, their trajectories calculated to intersect the enemy fleet at Neptune in 17 hours. The battle began with long-range probing attacks. Human ships emerged from behind Neptune's moons, fired railguns and missile volleys, then retreated. The Jatharan pursued with caution, spreading their formation to avoid clustered targets. Both sides tested the other, looking for weaknesses. Then Kethvar did something unexpected. He broadcast a transmission across all frequencies in human languages, directed personally at Admiral Chen. "I have studied your species," his translated voice said. "I have learned about your wars, your history, your philosophy of combat. You believe that any problem can be solved if you think creatively enough. You never accept that something is impossible. This is your strength, but it is also your weakness. You believe you will always find a way to win." Chen listened, wondering where this was going. "You taught me that flexibility defeats rigid thinking," Kethvar continued. "So I have become flexible. My ships now carry kinetic weapons. My armor is built to stop solid projectiles. My tactics no longer rely on shield superiority. I have learned to fight like a human. And now I will teach you that adaptation works in both directions." The Jatharan fleet suddenly accelerated, moving far faster than previous engagements. They had stripped down their ships, removing redundant systems to increase speed. They closed the distance rapidly, forcing human ships into close-range combat before they could execute their prepared strategies. Human railguns fired but struck new armor plating that absorbed or deflected impacts. Explosive shells detonated against reinforced hulls that had been specifically designed to resist them. The Jatharan returned fire with their own kinetic weapons, crude copies of human designs but effective at close range. The battle became a brutal brawl. Ships on both sides took heavy damage. The human cruiser Thermopylae, veteran of the first engagement, was torn apart by a Jatharan mass driver. The alien battleship Eternal Victory lost its entire forward section to a well-placed railgun volley. Chen watched her fleet suffer and knew they were losing. The Jatharan had learned too well. They had copied human tactics while maintaining their numerical advantage. Unless something changed, humanity would be ground down through attrition. "Ma'am, the Godrods are approaching target zone," her tactical officer reported. "Impact in 90 seconds. Chen had not told anyone about the Godrods, not even her senior staff. The fewer people who knew, the less chance of intelligence leaking. Now she watched the countdown and hoped that sometimes the old solutions worked against new problems. The first Godrod struck a Jatharan carrier at 40% of light speed. The tungsten penetrator, massing 3 tons, released kinetic energy equivalent to 50 megatons. The carrier did not explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized instantly along with the 2 destroyers unlucky enough to be nearby. The shockwave damaged a dozen other ships. Kethvar stared at his displays in shock. One moment, the carrier Victorious Dawn had been reporting successful engagement. The next moment, it was gone. No warning, no time to evade. Just sudden, overwhelming destruction. The second Godrod hit 30 seconds later. A battlecruiser became an expanding cloud of plasma. The third struck the flagship of the Jothran's Second Fleet, killing the admiral and 3,000 crew instantly. Evasive maneuvers, Kethvar roared. Scatter formation. Random vectors. But the fourth Godrod had already launched hours ago, following a predicted trajectory. It struck a repair ship, destroying it and crippling 2 nearby frigates through secondary impacts. 4 shots. 4 guaranteed kills plus collateral damage. 20 ships destroyed or disabled in less than 2 minutes. The Jothran fleet broke formation, ships moving frantically to avoid an attack they had not known was coming. Chen pressed her advantage. All ships, full assault. Target their command vessels. The human fleet surged forward, exploiting the chaos. But they were still outnumbered, still outgunned. The Jothran rallied, their training and discipline overcoming initial panic. The battle continued, both sides locked in combat that neither could easily escape. Then something unexpected happened. A new fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the battlefield. 50 ships, smaller than human or Jothran vessels, but numerous and aggressive. They bore the markings of the Karathi Federation. "This is Fleet Commander Talrik of the Karathi," a transmission announced. "We come to repay our debt to humanity. We come to fight for freedom." Other fleets followed. Nexian ships, Thalari warbirds, even a few vessels from species Chen had never heard of. They were not a unified force, barely had coordination, but they shared a common enemy, and they had all learned from human tactics, all equipped their ships with kinetic weapons. Kethvar realized the terrible truth. He had come to defeat humanity. Instead, humanity had ignited a galactic rebellion. Every species the Jothran had conquered, every world forced into submission, all of them had been waiting for someone to prove the Empire could bleed. Humanity had provided that proof.